Sam, what were some of Do Kwon, who is the creator of the Terra Foundation, what were some of the biggest mistakes made in his design? And also, has he had other projects fail before this?
Yeah. So first, to attack the first part of that, what were some of the problems with UST's design? So like I said before, UST has this sort of sister token called Luna, which can be minted and burned according to the price of UST. And the mechanism of this token was such that once Luna fell below a certain price, once the market cap of Luna in particular fell below the market cap of UST, it led to a situation where users could no longer, they weren't directly redeeming UST for Luna, but that's what they should have been able to do under the system by some sort of a proxy mechanism. They could no longer do that once the market cap of Luna sunk below the market cap of UST. And investors saw that, they panicked, and the price of Luna got so low. It's almost like a leveraged bet on UST. It got so low that the system, was beyond repair. So that's one problem. The next problem that I mentioned was that Anchor Money, it's a lending market. It was sort of like, in the same way that Uber in its early days was funded by a bunch of investors who were essentially subsidizing your taxi rides or your Uber rides in a bid for market dominance. A very similar sort of thing. And this is not, only Terra that does stuff like this, but a similar sort of a thing was happening with Terra, where investors, the Terraform Labs, the people behind Terra, they were essentially padding that sort of anchor savings account to give these high yields that could not be sustained at that same level without help. So the idea is that something like that has limited runway, and it's a great way to attract capital, but it's not a sustainable way to keep capital. So people saw that, even though I don't think the price or the returns, like I said, it started at 20% year over year yield. It went down. It wasn't enough to send people fleeing, but people saw that and took that as a cue as, hey, like this is not a sustainable thing. And, I think that caused some people to flee kind of preemptively. There's other issues to talk about as well. But I'll kind of pause there in case you have more questions. Oh, well, actually, you did ask another question. Did Do Kwon have any other projects that failed before this? So we reported out last week, kind of right as Terra was quote unquote death spiraling. I got a tip and worked with Danny Nelson, another awesome reporter at CoinDesk, to confirm this tip that Do Kwon and his team at Terraform Labs, or a select group of them, were also behind another failed stablecoin project called Basis Cash. Basis Cash was based on another project called Basis that didn't actually get off the ground because of regulatory concerns on the part of Basis's founders. Basis Cash, which was the follow-up from, it turns out, Do Kwon, who called himself Rick Sanchez in his pseudonym. It was a follow-up by him and apparently others at Terraform Labs to test out the theories behind Basis, which never got off the ground, like I said. It crashed. It was never like Terra. It never reached nearly the same scale, but it just showed that Do Kwon, many of whose ideas with Terra were inspired by Basis and Basis Cash, had already, demonstrated or some experience with, failing to make an algorithmic stablecoin work, which is what this is. It's not fully collateralized. And, he knew the risks going in, and, who knows, maybe if Basis Cash did work, either by memes or by its mechanism, we would have seen maybe a similar scenario to this one. But again, that's speculative. It's just interesting to know Do Kwon's background given the events from last week.
One of the things that we can do is preventive maintenance. How can we stop this from happening again? So what are some of the red flags to look for in other projects to see if this could happen in maybe Tether, Paxos, some of the other stable coins? What do you think, Sam? What are some of the red flags to look for?
Yeah, it's a good question. So maybe to preface this, you asked about red flags. It's not like this came out of nowhere. This wasn't a hack that came out of nowhere that nobody noticed, like other, crashes that we've seen of certain cryptos. Like this was something that a lot of investors were telling me in the lead up to this, not investors in Terra, were telling me in the lead up to this was going to happen because they saw some of those risks that we talked about, that you asked about before. But anyway, some of the red flags. One of the red flags was that 20% year over year yield that you got from the Anchor protocol. That's a lot. Your bank, if you go into a savings account, might give you like a 0.3% or 0.03% return over the course of a year. Now that's low. You can probably get higher returns somewhere else, but you know, it's you got to scratch your head and at least do some research if you're going to be offered that high of a return. Another risk is, well, frankly, the mechanism itself was a bit of a red flag. When you see, I struggle to like say this, but like algorithmic stablecoins have not worked in the past. This was the first attempt to really make them work, and it was the biggest, version of this. It's the largest market cap that any algorithmic, which again is an uncollateralized, nothing backing it, stablecoin. This is the largest any of them have ever gotten. But this is a model that is not proven. And if you're told that a thing is worth $1 and it needs to be worth exactly $1 in order to work, it's at least not something that you would want to, I don't think, pour your savings into, as many people did. And there's other red flags to talk about, but just like one kind of like piece of color to add to this whole story that we haven't mentioned yet, that people who have been tracking this story might have, heard, is like, if you went onto Reddit after the whole crash happened, or as the crash was happening over last week, if you went onto the Reddit to like the Luna forums, you'd see all of the posts were like either suicide awareness or people talking about somebody who had committed suicide. It was filled with reports of people who had apparently taken their own lives because they had over invested, or they had for whatever reason invested in this currency. And it's just really sad. So this goes to like the last red flag, which is that a lot of the marketing around this was designed to encourage people to move into the project without doing research. They would call, articles like mine FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It was just not a research-based sort of marketing campaign. And that's something that you should always be wary of. And that's not to say that the creators of Terra didn't think it would succeed. Personally, I think they probably did think that it would succeed if it got large enough. But it's good to get outside of bubbles if you want to avoid something like this. And it's terrible, tragic what's happened to a lot of these investors.
Oh yeah.
If I can just jump in here, I think one of the other red flags, just kind of looking at the yield promises, a lot of projects are promising massive yields, and you invest, you'll get a return at whatever, 20, 30%. I think it's always worth, questioning whether that is a sustainable return and something that will, continue working until you're able to cash out. And in a lot of cases, I don't think it is. And, this is one of those times.